but I can't read, I can't write, I can't spell, and most of the time I don't know my left from my right.
Now here's the thing about me that's a secret that most people don't know. I'm borderline retarded, and I can't read. These books that you're recommending,
Goethe.
I would pick that up and I would be like, 10 minutes later, I'd be like, what's my favorite song? The ABCs?
I think we're kind of getting off topic. Can you name 10 books?
Keep going back to me. Can you?
No, don't change.
No.
10 books.
You're changing the subject, actually.
10 books.
You're changing the
Okay,
subject, actually.
3 books.
Okay. Well, the Game of Thrones series,
It's not a book.
Twilight
I
series.
want the name.
It is a book.
Reading makes you sick, and reading makes you die!
Oh, how's it going? It's good to be back.
It's real good to be back, Dimes. Real good. You know, I was just thinking
You got a
about how
pep in your
good
step.
it's
Can I
good.
call that out? Like, you got a good energy tonight.
I was just thinking, Dimes, how good it's going to be when we walk on a certain stage later this year to that music playing. I'm just thinking it's going to be a really good time.
Yeah, I'm trying. Are we both going to wear the merch? Because I'm going to wear.
I was going to wear the merch.
Yeah, we got a new thing, a new hoodie that we've been working on. That's I might rock that one, and I'm trying to figure out like how loud the show intro should be. Like it should be like shockingly loud or offensively loud.
Loud enough to scare the hoes.
How many hoes do you think are going to be there?
Well, I was thinking about the waitresses.
Okay, yeah. I'd like to see a couple hoes.
just to make your wife feel something.
I got to keep her on your toes. You know what I'm talking about. You're recently married. You can't rest on your laurels. And like I'm old as shit, and I got
My
2
bedroom's
kids.
not dead yet, Dime, so I feel like I'm okay.
No, but you got to go away to come back. It's got to die to be resurrected.
You gotta
stronger.
get your groove back somehow.
Yeah, and you should be. You know, I always say like a healthy marriage. You gotta be making your wife nervous. You gotta be making her paranoid. You know, I understand that like women are always concerned about being gaslit, right? And the thing is, they're right. They are being gaslit most of the time.
See, you know, when they say, you know, gaslight, gatekeep, and girl boss, that they're stealing that from us.
It's so
Men came up with that shit first.
You know what it is? It's disgusting what they've done with ruining gaslighting, just like they ruined Warhammer 40K.
Just like they ruined Halo.
You can't. It's like, what if we turn around on guys? You can't make me like. We start off insane. You can't make me go insaner. You can only make me bored. Where's the word for that? This is what's so. You know, a lot of people don't know this, and I say this to young guys who aren't married. It's like you don't. Like I don't think you can even conceive of the level of misogyny you're capable of once you're married. Once you find a really good woman, like the best woman, and you have a real good love, you can hate women generally so much more effectively and just be. You could have. That's how you get a Tony Soprano energy at any height.
There you go. That's the way to do it.
Now I'm trying to figure if there's a way to weave that into the book that we're going to be discussing.
That's the real question. Is like, how do I use that? Write that down. Write that down.
Let me see. I'm just trying to pull up. I'm going to put it up on the screen here.
Yeah, let's do it.
It's by Eric Kaufmann, Whiteshift.
That's what we're talking about.
I can't make sense of this cover design, though, if I'm being honest. I get the the origami thing, but I don't know how that relates to the content of the book.
I just feel like if you're gonna talk about race, you're gonna come up with the way to do it the least offensive way possible.
Yeah, he should have gone the other way and made it like a Camp of the Saints style cover, just like a black hand stabbing the world. Oh, okay.
Man.
We got Sean Wyland saying Dimes knows about Dread Game.
That is true. Dimes is secretly black.
We got the Prudentialist is very well dressed. That's a nice comment. We got some nice comments.
We have some nice. This is one of the nicer episodes.
I can't wait to listen to my favorite feminist book review. We're the only
listen,
ones.
when I am shopping for venues for this event, that is literally how I sell it.
Well, we're the only ones reading it.
I know. We are a feminist book review podcast, and we were wondering if we could use your theater space for an event for us and our listeners. We've been really interested in theory lately.
Everyone who reviewed White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo didn't read it from cover to cover like we did. We're probably like the only ones who've actually read that book.
We've literally turned into that little provocateur in our intro. It's like, can you name 10? Can you name 10 feminists? And it's like only right wingers or peer reviewed publishers at universities are going to be able to give you that answer.
Yeah, or you start saying, name 10 feminists. Well, Odysseus. Guess what? We're talking about the Odyssey. Can you imagine? We should actually just review the book. We should review the Odyssey, and everyone could have such a bad time.
I would love to. If we ever need to have a pre-recorded episode, we'll just put like the Odyssey review on, and it'll be like 8 hours.
Or just the review is pretty good.
Yeah. All right, guys. See you next month.
it's a good one. You should read it or don't.
Or don't.
You know what? I hear they made a movie about it. Just give that a shot.
Yeah.
Okay.
If I had the money, though, Dimes, I would seriously do. I would seriously review or have if we were going to do an adaptation of like a great epic, I would do the Aeneid.
Dude, we should do the Bhagavad Gita. How would you even review that, right?
I would if we do it, I'm recording while I'm on a train.
You guys, like at the live show, we haven't announced the book that we're going to review yet, but it's like, so today we're going to be discussing the what's this? The Torah? We're just reviewing the Torah.
Guys, welcome to Do You Even Read Live? We've got the Mishnah. It'll be a great time.
Okay, so
Eric back Kaufmann. To reality.
Snap back to reality. Oh, there goes Kaufman. He's dope. And all right. Should we talk about Eric Kaufmann, the author?
We can.
Actually, let's start with the book first before we get into the author, because I think a book like this could only be written by a man like him. The heading here is Populism, Immigration, and the Future of White Majorities. This is a very popular book, very widely reviewed book. It's discussing, I would describe it as what we would term white genocide, but in different terminology. But
yeah,
the stuff that you would get very much in trouble for discussing 15 years ago, 20 years ago, you'd be called a kook, you'd be called a crank. Now people are just churning out these books that are accurate. Maybe I'll just lead with this because I might forget to say it later. But is it okay for people to return to Pat Buchanan? Because in reading this book, and it's a fine book, but it's not saying anything that Pat Buchanan wouldn't have said however many years ago. When was Death of America published, right? It's about demographic change. It's about mass migration. It's about a declining white population. We've been down this road before, written by, I would say, more prominent political figures, but I don't know, it's just, we're seeing the same stuff brought up now, but the tone is different. Whereas someone like Pat Buchanan, he's not the only one, but people like him would be saying, be careful, times there are changing. And now the tone and tenor is like, well, times have changed, it's too late now, what are we going to do about it? So it's sort of, what you could say, maybe he's talking past the deal. Maybe not all is lost, but the message of the book is more or less that the era of the white supermajority is over. It's never coming back. What is to be done now? And I guess, having said my piece, what are your initial thoughts on this book? Does that sound accurate, or am I missing anything?
It's a speculative book with a boatload of data. So if anything, it kind of reminded me of reading George Friedman, who is the founder of strategic forecasting. And he's written quite a few books trying to predict the future, or basically that's what his entire firm is for, to do. And like Mr. Kaufman, George Friedman is of a particular persuasion and understanding of the world that's very academic, while at the same time shaped by, I think, a largely deracinated culture and moving from place to place. George Friedman's like a Hungarian guy of Jewish descent who like fled the Iron Curtain and then kind of just became sort of like a neoconservative Cold Warrior. And at the same time, Kaufmann is born in Hong Kong, raised in Vancouver. Mom is a lapsed Catholic. Dad is an Eastern European gentleman of Jewish descent. And so it's just like we have two radically different individuals that have very similar sort of deracinated kind of cosmopolitan academic backgrounds that are writing about various world events, and in this instance about political demography and what the future holds. And this book is very explicitly focused on America, although it does touch on the Anglosphere and other parts of Europe where immigration has been the front and center political issue of their time and of our time. And then he kind of spends the remaining part of the book speculating. The book is worth its weight in gold explicitly for its bibliography. This book is rich with statistics. This book is rich with surveys, literature, and countless others that have written on this topic. There are plenty of other writers on political demography that I would also recommend, including the late Wilmot Robertson, Sam Francis, Lothrop Stoddard, Pat Buchanan, who all kind of get mentioned in this book, I think with the exception of Robertson, although he wrote about the disappearing majority, which is about wasps, which, of course, Kaufmann also wrote a book. That's his first book that he wrote in 2010. This one came out in 2018. So it's recent, but we have now enough distance between when the book was published, which was in the middle of the first Trump administration, to now, which is in the middle of the second Trump administration 8 years later. And I think that we have a lot to talk about, but it is about that very question, which is that white majorities are disappearing. What is the reaction to it? And in the wake of the focuses on Islam or border security, what does this mean? Pending that all other, like any other economist or political scientist, if all other factors stay the same, what will XYZ look like? And that is sort of what this book really discusses on, although it does not discuss some of the trends. I think it's good to look at because, you know, we're 8 years later, and some of the things that I think he's discussed is certainly not, I don't think he's entirely right, but I think that there's a lot worth discussing.
Yeah, you mentioned the Trump administration features pretty prominently in this book, but it is from the first term. The book is seeking to explain the rise of what he terms far-right populism. And we just got to circle back to the biography of the author. And I'm sure he's a fine man. He's written a good book full of good, proper, correct data. It is extremely funny that he is a half Jewish, quarter Chinese, quarter Costa Rican Canadian. And he wrote this book that is primarily about America. And because, like you said, it talks about Britain, talks about Scandinavia, and talks about Canada, where I assume most of his experience was drawn from. But like America is the center of this story. And so, but maybe this book could only be written by someone like him, because while much of the book is setting the stage for what was driving the demographic shift in America, there's a lot of good tables and graphs in there, but the way it ends is, and we'll get into this a bit more, but just to tee up what people can expect, it is predicting a hybridized America. Now, this might have sounded new in 2018. I bet there's a lot of listeners and viewers right now who know exactly what we're talking about. I'll give you one example, and I'm not trying to throw stones or rock the boat here, but I'm thinking of America First. Now, America First, headed up by Nick Fuentes, I don't even think that they would deny that they're a pretty multi-ethnic group that seems to at least attempt to center white identity. People used to think that was ironic or hypocritical. They no longer do. How many people in the far right space have noticed Hispanic Nazis? You see some pretty confusing identities in the space, but it seems that there's the half whites.
Well, and also in the wake of the 2020 election.
Yeah,
there has
yeah.
been the phrase that was very popularized in mainstream left-wing media was multiracial whiteness, the emphatic way to explain why, for instance, in Texas, and we can talk about this later, why the Rio Grande Valley over the course of the last couple of elections has swung radically towards Trump and towards voting for Republicans on the issue of immigration. So you've seen that a lot. I mean, we've seen this historically in America when it was mainly a monochromatic issue between blacks and whites, and you had your Uncle Toms of the world. But now multiracial whiteness has been used to describe this strange coalition of minorities that will vote for Trump or support Republican causes.
Yeah, or even embrace white nationalism, which again would sound preposterous 20 years ago, but that is the state of play right now, where you've got, I mean, some of the most prominent figures in the white identity movement are half this or half that. And people have just it's become a meme in that space, and we joke about it. But I guess that's what I was trying to get at with this book, which is that you hear what it's about, and you hear about the author, and you hear about maybe the angle it's taking, and you might feel a certain way about that. You might be upset, rightfully so. But the question is he wrong? Is his assessment incorrect about what is happening? Because a lot of this we can see right now. If you're in this space or adjacent to this space, it's been happening for, like, if you've been around for a while, you've seen it happen. And is it inevitable? We shall discuss. But that does seem to be what's happening right now. There is what you might term a hybridization. There is the embracing of white identity, heritage American identity by Hispanics. You know, Trump had a pretty surprising, Hispanic voter base at the time that this book was written. I don't even know what it is right now, but it might be the same, right? I mean, we got the Candace Owens of the world, we got a lot of interesting people coming out. Anti-Semitism has brought in a lot of people to the far right that you wouldn't expect, but to the point where you see a lot of Nazis stepping back from it. Like, it's too much. It's too popular now. You must find something else. So yeah, let me just pull the book back up here. Now, is my assessment of everything. Let's start with that before we get into it. Do you think the thesis is correct that there is a white shift? There is a shift in the redefinition of whiteness and a broadening of the boundaries of it, and that's inevitable. Like, that's just the future.
I mean, historically, there's a case to be made. I mean, between our treatment of a lot of Ellis Island waves of immigration, and also sort of just even earlier than that, before Ellis Island, I mean, waves of Germanic immigration as well. I mean, it would be until World War I that, for instance, like German, ethnic enclaves are kind of wiped out in terms of what's culturally acceptable. Large parts of the Midwest had German-speaking newspapers, and really that was explicitly it. And then I took a war with that, their home country to sort of change that. And in the same way, like I was saying this before the air, and I know I've said this before on other shows, but like when I visited some friends in Chicago, I was really surprised when I went to the CTA to like buy my ticket for the Blue Line, and my options on the terminal were English, Spanish, and Polish. And I was kind of excited to see Polish on the list of languages, like the top 3, and it wasn't something else. And I was like, wow, like that's a European language. Like I was really excited. And I said it's a white language, and that was sort of what kind of I was excited about that. And then like I had people in chat and sort of laughing at me. They're like, well, is that really white? And it's like, well, that's a fair point, but when the current crop of immigration has me excited or nostalgic for dealing with, old country Poles, Russians, Greeks, and like Croats, then like it bears the question about like, well, what do we mean by white shift? And of course, when we throw in that U.S. Hispanics are leaving the Catholic Church, as well as the rise of sort of these social gospel Pentecostalism, both in Central and South America, and it's also playing a role here in the United States as well, that there's a shift that's happening as well with their voting patterns. But at the same time, these people still live in ethnic enclaves. There's no there's no cultural force on the that's in the ruling elite that encourages assimilation, that promotes white culture, that doesn't actively try to deconstruct and dismantle the white majority that founded and built this country. And we've seen this more recently, of course, with the Smithsonian getting attacked by congressmen and House, committee hearings over whiteness and white culture and things like that. So on one hand, is there a shift? To some extent, yes, but historically, it's a little easier when they're European, and it's a lot harder to calculate white shift when, for the last 15 plus years, the dominant culture has said that you don't need to identify as white, you shouldn't assimilate, you shouldn't do this. Prior to 2012, the rate of Hispanics that were self-identifying as white was on the up and up. And then around what we would call the Great Awakening period, second term Obama, that begins to stop. And there is greater cultural insistence that you stay who you are and you don't assimilate, you don't speak English, you retain your cultural heritage. And so Hispanics, more like they, them, Hispanics.
Okay, we just need to, sorry to pause. We need to highlight this one. First of all, the man who was Penis Inspection Day already.
I'm thinking about all of our listeners on podcast platforms. They must have such a thrill when we stop talking. And it's like, what crazy username are we going to come up with today? That one tops it.
Hispanics, more like them, their Hispanics. You could
they
them,
more like them, their Hispanics.
But them, there. There's 3 layers to this that I like. All right, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no. So overall, white shift would be far more inclined to happen if there was sort of a cultural force in place that encouraged a dominant white super structure. Whereas nowadays, that's almost emphatically rejected and has been for almost the entirety of my adult life. So the last, what am I, 30? So like you turn 18. So yeah, like the last, 12 years of my life, it has functionally just been being white is bad. And it's probably been longer than that. It's really been my whole lifetime. So, but it's hard to say that because it's like, yeah, like if a British guy comes over here, and we saw this with the World Cup, where like the whites and like the Europeans and the Japanese were just they were all in on it, and it was so easy for us to have the Holland guy from Norway, like put on a cowboy hat. We're all like, he's one of us, versus like anyone from Latin America like trying to act like an American. It's like, well, we know that's not true.
It's like you going to Japan and putting on a kimono. They don't just like clap and say, look, he's Japanese.
Yeah, if that were
now.
the case, then like Jared Taylor would be the most Japanese man alive.
And he should be. There's a strong. Hey now, but
you're an all-star.
There's a few good points you made there. One, like you and he correctly call out that this white shift is part of an ongoing white shift, and it is true to say that the definition of what white is has expanded, and there's people that we even know, going by the Benjamin Franklin definition, white is strictly defined as those from Britain.
Post the circle, Sandbatch.
Yeah, like it's like Britain and then like southern Scandinavia. Like it kind of reaches into a different continent there. But like that was their definition of white. So German, not white. French, not white.
The Swiss, swarthy.
Yeah, Swiss, not so none that's white. But so my definition that I use now, and this is just out of necessity and out of pragmatism, I define white by what anti-white people hate. So and you can actually get a pretty good reading. Who's anti-white, who's it that they hate. And then for all intents and purposes, strategically maybe that falls within white, but that has changed over 100 years. So now, and you're talking about the broadening definition of whiteness. People in our space would bicker about whether or not Eastern Europeans count as white or Russians, but now we're talking about like, is Kiki Palmer technically white? You know what I mean? Like those are the conversations people are having right now. And the thing is, you really have nothing to say to someone who really just identifies that way. So if a half German Mexican living in Mexico City wants to say that he's white, you can't really stop him. It's actually a question of strength of will and sheer numbers. So do you have the numbers to argue against that? Yes or no? I
Yeah.
think he's making the argument of no. So it's not going to be up to this shrinking minority of white people what the definition of white even is. And I think that's an interesting reality to have to live in. And he's not advocating one way or the other. I think he's kind of, there's certain parts of this book that I disagree with, because I think it would be fair to say that he's a liberal. I don't think he's not a far right guy. I don't know if you'd call him conservative. I think it would be safe to say that he is a liberal. And what we always say on our show is by the time a liberal admits fault, it's too late. So the fact that this book is being released now and they're conceding all of the points that far right radicals would have been talking about years ago, it's because the whole book, the message of the book is these far right populists have a point. He says that repeatedly, and he's asking, how did we get here? What caused them to, what caused Trump, and what caused the rise of far right populist parties throughout Europe? And so it's like it's lib for lib literature, which is like, okay, maybe guys, we need to actually take this seriously. But it's like, when this was written, it was already too late for that. It's too late. Like, we're like, yay, they're finally writing a book about what we're talking about. It doesn't fucking matter. The ship has hit the fucking iceberg. I mean, I was talking to someone today, but like every single day, all across X, Telegram, wherever, the same conversations are happening, where you've got just regular old white guys who've just completely accepted that, I think the only way to turn this around is for the entirety of society to collapse. And that's it. That's their politics. Their politics is waiting for apocalypse. And that's really tragic, and that's really sad. And I don't really know what to say to those people. Sometimes they're venting, and I don't hold it against them. I'm not going to just pour cold water on their dark and twisted fantasies. Look, we've all got them, but it's common enough that people who've looked at the numbers, read the data, seen every graph, they're hopeless. And I don't really know what to do about that. And I guess this book is trying to kind of surf that wave. It's like, it's not so bad. Like, whiteness will survive, and it'll be a torch that is maintained by these other groups. Anyway, so I'm just kind of repeating the point at this point, but I think it is interesting. And what's your take on what I just said? Like, are you optimistic about things? Are you afflicted by the same sort of what you might call the black pill? Or pessimism?
I would say yes to some extent, but at the same time, I have to. I don't know. Maybe it's just there's the English part of me that's like I have to keep a stiff upper lip about things. I am pragmatic in the way I approach my daily life as well as what I do politically, but also at the same time, I know that things are going to get really bad before they get better. And it's like the old, tank meme with like a bunch of like Russian soldiers. I think it's like from a war photo from Chechnya or something. Like, it's like, hey, things are going to get way, way worse. And it's just, I'm not so sure. And I think that's sort of the respective problem to look at here is that I have to have optimism. Because if I don't have optimism, that what am I doing this for? And I've said it since the very beginning when I was online. If I can plant the vine and fig tree that my grandchildren sit under and they're not afraid, then my life will have been worth it. So that's sort of the attitude I have to have. And I think that unfortunately where our current, DDD cycle is with dread and debilitation and dependency, like I feel as if it can be, if you're too much of an optimist, that's a bad thing. But at the same time, I would much rather work with people that believe in something, even if they're different than myself or anything like that.
You're planting fig trees that you will never enjoy the shade of. It's for your grandchildren, and looking down from heaven, you see them sitting beneath the tree saying, I'm such a fig cell tree chud. And you throw a bolt of lightning at the fucking tree.
This is why I'm terrified of like when like Zoomers and Gen Alpha become like religious clerical types. It's just like, I can't wait. I'm a sin maxing retarded chud. Like I can't wait. All right, can let's get in the book.
Everyone's got face tattoos in the future.
That's downright terrifying.
Hey, it's the new circumcision. Okay, so we're
That's what baptism's for.
Whoa. Baptism? Hey, buddy, I don't know about that. So I'll just start with some of the preamble here. It says, I kind of like the phrasing here. Let's see, make sure I got the right page here. Yeah, he says, many people desire roots, value tradition, and wish to maintain continuity with ancestors who've occupied a historic territory. This means we're more likely to experience what I term Whiteshift, a process by which white majorities absorb an admixture of different peoples through intermarriage, but remain oriented around existing myths of descent, symbols, and traditions. Naturally, there will be contestation, with cosmopolitans lauding exotic origins, but most people will probably airbrush their polyglot lineage out of the story to focus on their European provenance. And this is why, like, he'll make that assertion, but he does give examples. There's lots of examples and citations of where you see this now. So most Turks trace their origins to Central Asia, neglecting their Byzantine Christian ancestors and the large number of immigrants who arrived from far-flung parts of the Ottoman Empire. And moving on just to page 7 here. Okay. It continues, Whiteshift has a second, more immediate connotation, the declining white share of the population in Western countries. Whites are already a minority in most major cities of North America. Together with New Zealand, North America is projected to be minority by 2050, with Western Europe and Australia following suit later in the century. This shift is replacing the self-confidence of white majorities with an existential insecurity channeled by the lightning rod of immigration. No one who has honestly analyzed survey data on individuals can deny that white majority concern over immigration is the main cause of the rise of the populist right in the West. And I just wanted to pause there because, again, he wrote this around the dawn of the Trump administration, and I really do think...
Published in 2018.
The language would be so different if you went through the Biden administration and if it was published tomorrow. And you just witnessed how limited this right-wing populist white awakening was. You know, like it's bigger than it used to be. But like we always say, I think the most deflating statement you could hear is that there's still white liberals in South Africa. And I was speaking with Conscious Caracal on my show the other day, and who's a South Afrikaner advocate, and he's in with AfriForum. But just consider that, where there seems to be a literal race war going on there, and there's still white women there who say the exact same shit as they're doing here, and however many racial atrocities you have to witness over the past 8 years, there's still a sizable amount of white people who, it's not that they're not aware of what's going on. They've heard it. They've heard every single one of our points. They've been red-pilled, but they spat out that pill, or they took the red pill and it didn't fucking work. No one was prepared for that. No one was prepared for, we thought it was an awareness problem. Everyone's aware, and they just got angrier. And the mask just slipped off and said, no, we just want to kill you. Okay, well... that's difficult. So I think there's sort of this spirit behind the book of this is going to keep snowballing until white identity is really popular. I'm like, I don't know about that. The number one enemy of white identitarianism is still somehow white people and other groups. But I don't know how many videos I've seen recently. I do know how many. I'm going to say 4. Where there's a group of white guys in various countries in the UK and in America where they're tackling and detaining or beating up some African who's naked. Most of the time they're actually just naked in public because they're jerking off or about to molest a kid, and these white guys are just taking them down, and then without fail, some white woman runs in to stop them from doing that and to like cradle the the illiterate pedophile rapist. And I'm like, I don't know who else does that. I don't know what that is. I don't know how to help that. At this stage in the game, there's still that person out there, and there's a lot of that person. I don't like using the term of suicidal empathy. I think that's just like made up. That's a bucket for some other, psychological afflictions. But yeah, I don't know. This is all to say that I think that the rise of far right populism had a lower ceiling than I was expecting. What do you think about all that?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot to be said that at the present moment, you have to ask yourself, why more than ever has there been the I guess you could call it curse, affliction, predisposition to repress any sense of self-preservation on a collective scale? Is this because we've been so universalized and homogenized into a fine powder? Is this because there is something about liberalism that tells us that, we should have a greater degree of openness? Is it because our understanding of openness is really only applied towards individuals that kind of looked like us, as well as our older traditions of of guest rights and things like that, when we were restrained to parts of either the British Isles or parts of the European continent, who knows? And I mean, Kaufmann does a good job at sort of breaking this down between, open and positive and negative liberalism and discussing that. But at the same time, what he doesn't discuss, although I think it's very in your face, is the blatant post Second World War, what a lot of people like to say is like the post-war mythology, or some like to call it the Nuremberg regime or whatever, wherein there is a certain degree in which positive self-identity with your own ethnic or racial or whatever socially as well as biologically constructed sense of self has that's bad. And instead we must allow ourselves to be so open that we will embrace a sort of left-wing modernism that destroys any sense of traditional understanding of people in place. And I think that's a large part to play in it. Kaufmann discusses that, I think, a great deal. He has a whole chapter on liberalism discussing this very thesis. And so overall, I think that it's sort of worth looking at, especially as now when we're looking at how are we responding to immigration and to the destruction of the white majority that had founded Canada, that had founded the United States, that had founded all, there are, and I don't even like using these phrases, but I mean, it's really apt to just apply. It's like, these are the indigenous peoples of the European continent. These are the indigenous peoples of like the American state and Canada. These are the ones that founded it and built it. And that's who they are. And to say that like they're not worthy of surviving, or that their preference to want to survive and to retain their majority status is bad, that's something that is, that Kaufmann spends time looking at with the data. But at the same time, 8 years later, the question about like what the new American is going to look like, or what the future is going to look like, we have noticed that 8 years on, and even while, we have papers discussing research into these things. I mean, the dating market has been a lot more selective, not just on jobs or height, but more so on race. There's a working paper on this very issue that came out in January of this year discussing that exact thing. And so if anything, the white majorities, while they're being ethnically repressed and suppressed by immigration, they are the ones that still have a great deal of, interracial, keeping within their race, versus being, preferable to the out group. And there's a lot of data that Kaufmann goes into here. So, I mean, like like I said, the book is really worth its weight in its bibliography. But overall, to speculate what the future looks like, they'll say, well, of course, the future is non-white if we stay at the current course. But Kaufmann, makes a few references to other groups that have reasserted national and ethnic identities. He says, that we're probably not going to be like the Ivory Coast or other places that just get really violent. That remains to be seen. But at present, I think that we can dive into this and see where he's coming from, because we have a pretty collective understanding of where the history of immigration restriction comes from, and how these identities have shifted and changed as we start seeing immigration caps get put in. Like, there's a greater sense of what it means to be white, both after the Civil War and after the 1924 immigration and laws get passed.
Yeah, you mentioned I believe you mentioned left modernism in there, and so he establishes that early on in the book, and he blames, in large part, our current malaise on white left modernism. So what does that mean? He says much of this book is concerned with the clash between a rising white tribalism and an ideology I term left modernism. A sociologist member of the New York Intellectuals, group of writers and literary critics, Daniel Bell, used the term modernism to describe the spirit of anti-traditionalism which emerged in Western high culture between 1880 and 1930. With the murderous excesses of communism and fascism, many Western intellectuals embraced a fusion of modernist anti-traditionalism and cultural egalitarianism, distinguishing the new ideology from both socialism and traditional liberalism. Cosmopolitanism was its guiding ethos. Unlike socialism or fascism, this left-wing modernism meshed nicely with capitalism and globalization. The left modernist sensibility spread from a small elite to a much wider section of the middle-class society in the 1960s, with the rise of television and the growth of universities taking over as the dominant sensibility of high culture. And this is interesting. I don't know if he's doing what I would accuse others of doing, and which I don't like to do, which is trying to find the real culprit behind such far-reaching social changes.
I mean, that's sort of part, bread and butter of a lot of books like this, and it's also it's the bread and butter of how many like differing factions on the right, like some like to blame the Enlightenment, some like to blame the Reformation, some like to blame one specific ethnic group or one specific law or one specific ideological or philosophical or metaphysical change. And we really like univariate analysis, and to a large extent, Kaufmann does the same. Is like, well, if we look at John Locke and then we drag this all the way to like Popper or Horkheimer, and I'm like, it's a bit of a stretch there, bud. Like,
I saw,
not so much.
Who was it? Our namesake Jay Dyer. He was on it was Tucker Carlson, and he was blaming nominalism, right? Because you can just keep
that ain't it, Chief.
Going further and further back, and we have on the show. I mean, you can go past antiquity. You can go into the Stone Age if you want to. You can get, and some authors do. Even my friend Mike Maxwell of Imperium Press, he had written a series of articles blaming the modern world on the shift towards the axial age. So he's going back 3,000 years, I believe, and that's where it all went wrong. But you can go back 4,000, you can go back 5,000 years if you wanted to. But I don't know what to do with that. I don't know when someone says nominalism is to blame because it gave us like categories of things. I'm like, okay, but I don't. So you just want to, and it's his description of nominalism. I think was actually wrong, but it's you can get very just too theoretical with this that no one knows what to do with this assessment. You know what I mean? Like how you can go back to the Enlightenment, you can go back to the scientific revolution, you can go back to. But at a certain point, you go back to like, we just need to be a completely different people genetically. Like you're going back so far in the past. It's like, there's not English people as you know it at that point. So what the fuck are we even talking about? And so when he says left modernism, it's like that is a sociologist term. You're talking about sort of a conceptual revolution, but I like to drill down further and identify the groups, because here's an interesting thing that we were talking about even in my community. It was either today or tomorrow. Everything fucking blurs together. But it was talking about the history of mass migration in Canada, where I'm from. And a lot of people like to just blame the Jews for that. And I'm like, that's part of the conversation, of course, but it's necessary but insufficient. We love that phrase, necessary but insufficient. And I was using the Chinese migration as an example. And it was Pierre-Elliott Trudeau, Justin Trudeau's father, that was almost single-handedly responsible for opening the floodgates of Chinese migration into Canada through the West Coast. And at the time, it was the rise of Maoism in communist China. And the argument someone was making, it was actually made by a writer that I know named Catgirl Kulak. He was basically saying that all this shit about, neoliberalism, that's just from America. America has infected the Western world with neoliberalism. And I said, you know, of course, America is the most consequential empire in human history, but if you really want to look at the history, that push for Chinese mass migration was done in spite of America. America didn't want Canada engaging in a relationship with Maoist China. Like, they were trying to sanction them. They didn't want anyone trading with them, but we were trying to spite America by saying, fuck you, you can't tell us what to do. So we started doing that. But I'm like, I tell you what, there's no Jews involved in that move. Sorry, I looked. They're not there. And it actually wasn't America driving it. It was America telling them not to, which isn't to say America's not involved in every instance, but there's a lot of cases like that where certain aspects of this, there's not just a top of the pyramid driving it all. You have to get into like the Canadian political and business class, and how much is the business class actually driving it and affecting politics, all that fucking shit. But it's a very high resolution problem that no one wants to look at because they're not really interested in solving it. Like, I kind of like this book because it is breaking it down. Like, I don't like dealing in just, like I said, proliferation of concepts. Doesn't mean anything to me. Who are the groups driving it? What is actually happening? Who did what and where? And what can we do about that? Because that implies that a who can do a what now to perhaps reverse it, address it. And if you just surrender to social forces at work, it makes you seem very small. It makes it seem like you can't do anything about it, but I think you can. And so even though the solution, you know, expanded upon in this book is more just what to do about mixed race whiteness, you know, we would welcome the audience to imagine a world where that's not necessarily the case. Anyway, a lot of this has just been because I do find this book very interesting, and I don't want it to just be reading the text, of course, but it does inspire conversation, I think. So I've been talking for a while. Do you have anything to say to that?
I was going to say that we should probably, I do actually want to get to some sections of the text that we can discuss, because I think that there's a lot. We can get to the speculation part at the end, because I think that's the part where everyone's really interested, and we'll save the juicy bits for last. But I do think that there's some interesting parts when we talk about sort of the history of America's doors being open, because this book is heavily focused on the United States. Everyone has sort of looked at the United States, and a lot of our friends over in Europe will do the late 56% meme, which totally fair, right? But at the same time, the rest of a lot of Western European, as well as the rest of the Anglosphere, has basically tried to, they're like speed runners. They're trying to beat our PB right now. And like Justin Trudeau saw The Great Replacement in America, and he was just like, I gotta, like, you know, find an any percent glitchless way to just destroy Canada. And I think that he's done a really good job, and so has Carney. So I mean, like, I think this is something to seriously consider. But looking at immigration, you know, we have if you want to go to page 53, I think this is worth looking. It's 53 on the PDF. We have the exact same PDF, so this should be just fine. I want to talk about the restrictionist interregnum and go from there, because this is, you know, probably one of the most important eras of American history when it comes to immigration as well. So I'm just going to read, and then we can discuss. I think this is sort of important. The Johnson-Reed Act and its alter ego, pluralism, are recognizably modern. Most would recognize this as the basis for the nationalist globalist polarization that increasingly divides Western societies. The situation by 1924 was a far cry from its pre-1890 dispensation, when a liberal assimilationist Anglo-Americanism spanned both universalist and ethno-nationalist shades of opinion. This is very true. If you're interested, go read Woodrow Wilson's thoughts on the First World War. I mean, this is pre-1924, but you would definitely describe him as a white nationalist in that respect. Prior to 1890, most Anglo-Protestant thinkers held the view that their ethnic group could assimilate all comers. During moments of euphoria, they talked up the country as a universal cosmopolitan civilization. In their reflective moods, they remarked on its Anglo-Saxon Protestant character. By 1910, this Emersonian double consciousness was gone. Each side of its contradiction a separate and consistent ideology. Most WASP intellectuals, like New England patrician senator Henry Cabot Lodge, ethno-nationalists who backed restrictions, or Bourne and Dewey, cosmopolitans calling for diversity and open borders. Few ethno-nationalists favored open immigration. No pluralists endorsed restriction. Herein lies the roots of our contemporary polarized condition. After 1924, the proportion of the Southern and Eastern Europeans entering the country dropped dramatically. This is the Reed-Johnson Act. The Great Depression reduced the demand for workers. By 1930s, pluralism had become influential in liberal, Democratic, and Republican circles, but played little part in Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. FDR did break new ground by employing an unprecedented number of Catholics and Jews into his brain trust of advisors. This is where we get Tri-Faith America. Nevertheless, when push came to shove, he reflected the common sense understanding of most Protestant Americans. When he told the Catholic advisor Leo Crowley in 1942, Leo, this is a Protestant country, and the Catholics and Jews are here on sufferance. The regionalist aesthetic of the New Deal, reflected in the public art and murals funded by the government, celebrated native-born rural America and the country's settler past, not immigrant diversity or the modernism of the young intellectuals. As a prominent scholar of the American ethnic relations, Nathan Glazer put it, in the later 1920s, the Quota Act took its toll, then the Depression began, and nobody wanted to come. So for a long time, the American public opinion lived in the consciousness and the expectation that America was completed. No one expected that America would again become an immigrant society.
So we got a really great comment here from Lane Hefner, and you're more of the expert in American history, says, revisionist nonsense. The restrictionist movement was an elitist Yankee drive from New England in the 1890s. What do you think about that?
There's a large degree of truth to that. And I mean, I just covered 1924. We can go a little earlier into the 1890s. But I mean, also American racial identity, it does span. There's if you want to go back even further, we can also take a look at prior to the Civil War. The Free Soilers are called Free Soilers because they explicitly do not want blacks anywhere outside of their existing territories in the slave states. They don't want the rest of the continent to be darkened by this. Both literally and figuratively. So, I mean, this is why I take issue with like Abbeville Institute guys that are trying to like paint, you know, these Yankees as like terrifying racists. And it's just like, well, I think that they were kind of aware of the issue between white-black relations, and to spread that throughout the rest of the continent is probably a fair thing that they want to oppose on. But of course, that's to restrict the South's economic and cultural expansion as well, leading to the conflict of the war itself. But nevertheless, there is that New Englandism that comes from sort of a liberal progressivism that we can talk about in the previous section, because you have the younger intellectuals, which has both the color of Yankee, you know, restrictionism, but also transcendentalist-esque kind of open immigrant societies. But we're just going off of what we have here with the text.
Yeah, as you were reading that, you see a lot of mention of the words like character and spirit and things like that, and people trying to define ethnicity by other terms. And I just wanted to just circle back to this, because I think this is important to understand where he's coming from. Let's see here. Do I have it on this page? I'm just going to read it somewhere on this page. But it says, outsiders have been absorbed over time, but the key boundary markers of religion in the Jewish case and language for the Greeks have endured. Their proper names, myths of ancestry, aspects of memory, and culture persisted in some form, even as forgetting and revival also took place. Groups like the Greeks were thus able to absorb massive demographic incursions, such as Slavic settlements of the 6th to 10th centuries. Likewise, I contend that today's white majorities are likely to successfully absorb minority populations while their core myths and boundary symbols endure. So that's important. So he, like many others, when they're defining ethnicity, you know, language is important. Of course it is. And so is mythology, so is culture, all that stuff. But the question is, let's take America, let's take white Americans. If you get a sufficient amount of non-whites, non-heritage Americans, assuming the identity of white, what symbols do you think they will elect to represent whiteness? Do you think they'll be the traditional symbols, or will they suddenly have some strong opinions about it's just about freedom and liberty? You know what I mean? Like, is there an essential whiteness to the symbolism that they will choose to excise from history? Because, and this is really just beating around the bush of what I'm really trying to say, which is, yes, language is important, culture is important, values, mythology, all that shit. However, I do think you just need that strong ethnic core. Like, you can't have a centering of whiteness without white people centered, the genetic stock. I don't think it works abstractly. I think that's kind of what he's getting to, which is like, okay, like the people can change, but this thing called whiteness, this thing called Europeanness can survive. Just like, look how much the Greeks have fucking changed, and we still have, Greek, we still have Souvlaki, and I'm like, yes, but like these are almost incidentals, right? Like I just maintain that if we're having a conversation about how to maintain whiteness, I do think you need that core of like you actually just need the genetic stock centered it. And I think what you're seeing is an attempted replacement of the center of that. And I think they're going to bring in a lot of new symbolism to replace the existing symbolism. What do you think
Well,
of
I
that?
mean, we've seen this since ever. I mean, the decrease and the depreciation, for instance, of like the stars and bars, the Confederate battle flag is a really good example of this. More recently, of course, the appeal to heaven, the pine tree flag, and I mean, virtually at this point, the American flag itself, which used to be considered the universal identity for an American. It didn't matter if you lived in Montana or you were from, New Hampshire or Maine or from Florida or from Alabama. This was the national banner. And to where now it's gotten to a point in our political milieu that the American flag is just considered the symbol of white people and white Americans. And by that extent, just Americans, because I think we all kind of know what an American is. Did you disappear there, Dimes?
Sorry, I was still muted.
Oh, okay.
Someone made a comment about, I think I coughed into the mic, and now I've been just vibrating with anxiety. There's we spent a bit on the first section there. There's a whole section on how we got here politically, which is interesting. Then there's a lot of stuff about the fertility crisis. Would you like to go into that a little bit?
Yeah, we can talk fertility. That's fine. I'm for it.
And just for people who don't know, for people who are new to the space, let me just, what page am I looking at? Let's go to page 33. So prequel to Whiteshift, from WASP to white in American history. I think we mentioned that at the top about how WASP, meaning white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, transitioned to just white. And there's been other creators, thought leaders who've addressed the WASP question, and I'm not an expert on that. And maybe you would be the one. I think the old Glory Club would have a bunch of guys who would have a lot of opinions about that. But
oh boy, do they ever!
Just as a representative of them, do you think the WASP has been marginalized in American culture? And do you think it's at least aesthetically is trying to be recentered in the MAGA movement? Or what do you think about that?
So one, absolutely, yes. It's been heavily marginalized, especially since the Second World War. Helen Andrews has done a lot of great work detailing the sort of ethnic coalitions that have brought about that. And I mean, mainly the university system had widely moved in the 1960s to the 70s from primarily WASPs to mainly Catholics and Jews, or just non-religiously affiliated individuals, or high church mainline Protestants with highly progressive views. On top of that, even in American conservatism has been highly de-anglicized, highly de-waspified in its intellectual circles. And even Sam Francis noticed this in his book, Beautiful Losers, wherein he discusses, some of the most influential conservative thinkers of his time, either working at the National Review or other publications. And almost all of them were Germanic, Catholic, Jewish, and there was like maybe one or two Southern Protestants. And that has continued, I think, at a large base. Whereas the evangelical, American Christian, overwhelmingly white, is of course in Middle America. They still exist, obviously, in a lot of blue states as well, either in suburban or ex-urban areas. But I think that nonetheless, yes, that's absolutely true. They still have a relatively high fertility rate. They still have a large degree of cultural belonging. The Bible Belt's the Bible Belt for a reason, and you can see it if you drive, through it, and you'll understand why that's still there. These are things that you would identify overwhelmingly with white culture. Even the kitschiness of it all is still overwhelmingly white. Whether we're making fun of like Big Ten or SEC families, in the University of Alabama and the rest. Even then, that's there, but it is suppressed. It's not considered to be high culture or high status. And I think that that's done a great degree of denigrating their political effectiveness, because they have consistently delivered for conservative interests and for a large extent immigration restrictionists. They still adhere that they are the ones that have the truth. They are the ones that adhere that this is the way to live, and this is how you should be, this is how it's always been, and this is how we're going to do it. And so I think to some extent they're trying to recapture some of that old moral majority sort of, theocon side of things away from Catholics and reassert themselves as the majority. And to a large extent, they are religiously in the United States, while at the same time, they're the ones that are often denigrated the most in popular media. Like I mentioned at the beginning, like there is no positive representation in media for white people, period. And I mean, like we saw this during the 2024 election. Like, lest we forget, Tim Walz and Harry Sisson were meant to be acceptable places for white people to be, as they were sidelined and just the butt of the joke, like Archie Bunker or any sort of white dad in a commercial. Like that's sort of how it was going to be, versus the guy that goes to church, owns guns, has a small business, and consistently doesn't like where the direction of the country is going.
But if Tim Walz had progressed any further than he did, they were about to get him to rap. Like they had a whole line of humiliations for him, like everything they could do to make it seem like a corny, safe white guy.
I thought they did that with the white people tacos meme.
Get him to eat a boiled potato and have the blacks laugh at him.
Have him try to wash chicken.
Have him try to wash chicken in the sink and go, what the what? have him go to the hood and try to get a black girlfriend. Now I'm watching that.
Look, man, I've seen Napoleon Dynamite. I know how this ends.
Mind you, I am watching that. So there's a part here that says, it's easy to forget how secure a WASP-dominated America seemed prior to 1970. In 1956, an American sociologist, C. Wright Mills, observed, quote, almost everywhere in America, the model of the upper class, social classes is still pure by race, by ethnic group, by national extraction. In each city, they tend to be Protestant. Moreover, Protestants of a class church denominations, Episcopalian mainly, or Unitarian, or Presbyterian. In his Protestant establishment, E. Digby Baltzell, an old stock Philadelphian, urged the American elite to open up to other ethnic groups. Baltzell's and Mills's world had recently been brought to life by the television series Mad Men, featuring a white shoe New York advertising agency from the 1960s. Yeah, just describing what Mad Men is. It'd be so funny if he spent like the next few pages saying his favorite episodes. So yeah, I really wanted. I don't know too much about the WASP thing, but someone had made a comment about how. And I highlighted just there a few moments ago, but how there is no longer a single WASP on the American Supreme Court.
Correct.
Which is pretty wild, even as an outsider, that's pretty wild to me. Because a lot of people maintain that there's a secret WASP establishment running America, and sometimes that just...
I've yet to see it.
Yeah, it feels... And they're puppeting everything from behind the scenes to their benefit, and you're just not allowed in there. I'm like, that sounds like soothing faith to have, but like you said, I don't see it. It doesn't reach me where I'm at. Moving on here. Now, he's got an interesting take here about sort of the rise of the... I just want to get to this. I want to get your view on this. So I'm moving up to page 71 here. There's a good graph here.
Sure.
So it's for people who are listening, this is a graph from 1965 up in 2017. It says, in your view, the question posed is, in your view, should immigration be kept at its present level, increased, or decreased? And you're watching present level go up and down. Like the biggest rise is increased from under 10% in 1965 up into over 20% by 2017. No opinion is pretty stable there, and I would say present level and decrease kind of meet below 40%. So the only increase you see is the number of people who think it should be increased, which is interesting to me because it doesn't seem like there's much of an opinion change with the entrenched population. It just seems to be that as you allow more people to come in, more people believe that it should be increased, right? like you would expect to see no opinion alter a bit as well. Like it just seems like it's driven by the acceptance of these populations who would, of course, want more of their ethnic cohort.
Well, the other thing too that Kaufman spends a really good time talking about later on in the text is that this is also going to be shaped by what's your personal interaction with them, and also immigration for people who are not affected by it. They're not going to be they may have no opinion, or they're going to say, oh, it's fine, or it should increase, or whatever. Whereas those that have experienced diversity are the quickest to denounce it, or to try and get away from it and seek exit. In Texas, for an example that's more contemporary, there was a primary runoff between Jim Wright and Beau French for the Texas Railroad Commissioner, which is the institution in which kind of OPEC is based off of, because the Texas Railroad Commissioner really deals with the oil and gas industry and really nothing else these days. And Jim Wright was heavily favored to win. A, he was an incumbent, but B, he was well liked by rural conservative voters that didn't see anything wrong with how things were. Whereas if you go to Beau French's like social media platform and what he said in the debates and things like that, he is vehemently an immigration restrictionist, like shut this shit down. Just deportation and denaturalization is like the swiftest way to fix all problems. And of course, he is from, if memory serves, like Tarrant County was the county he was at, Fort Worth Republican Party like chairman, and decided to make the run for it after he continued to become increasingly spicy online, much to the chagrin of some of his Republican colleagues. And he won the primary runoff narrowly because all of the urban conservatives and the suburban conservatives voted for him overwhelmingly, versus those that wanted to go with Jim Wright, who weren't as exposed to the diversity problem. A guy living out in the Panhandle who voted for Jim Wright has no real understanding or real presence of the fact that if you go to the Frisco Mall, it looks like fucking Mumbai. Like, that's just how it is, right? And so the thing about what you're talking about, I think a lot of that sort of perception, yes, is shaped by immigration advocates. And of course, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry to bring people in here. And we've noticed this when the USAID stuff came out with Doge, how much, Catholic charities and other groups were getting to help bring people in. And that it's a multi-million-dollar industry for immigration attorneys and human rights lawyers and things like that. But also just that there are plenty of well-to-do people that would think it should increase because they believe that diversity is good, because there's either some semblance of, we're so open that we'll take anybody and we'll all sing Kumbaya, or I'm for it because I want to increase my own ethnic groups, station and power and leverage. And as I was telling Warren McIntyre on his program a couple weeks ago, like, you have someone born from Ethiopia, born in Addis Ababa or whatever, saying openly that like her people, like the third world, should inherit America. That way we can punish America, but also so we can actually rule here instead of just asking for scraps at the table. So it's a mix of the ethnic demographic shift, but also I think just to a large part your exposure to diversity.
Yeah, and on that same wavelength, I've got, and I'd love you as the expert on American history here. I think this is right up your alley. It's talking about the rise of liberalism.
My senior thesis was on the Constitutional Convention, not on the history of immigration, but yeah, I mean, I can talk about it as much as I can, but let's go.
He mentions he points to again a broader sociological change that we discussed before about what happened in the 1960s. What was the counterculture? And I always cite that book Decadence by Jim Haugen. I really liked his assessment of it because it was more of a leftist reframing of that era that made it seem like that was all just one big progressive movement. And like I was saying before, it was more of a wide-reaching systemic change that was several discrete little revolutions, social revolutions happening at the same time that really didn't have anything to do with each other, but were eventually co-opted by leftism and by Marxists. And so you can kind of just count them up. There's like the LSD drug revolution, which is different than the rise of marijuana use, which was different than the anti-war movement. And the leftists will take credit for that, but it actually wasn't them. And the anti-war movement was its own thing that got swept up in all this stuff. And the hippies were actually their own thing. And then there's like the rise of these alternative religions. That's where Americans started getting introduced to like the Hare Krishna shit, just like Orientalism. You saw Orientalism wash across America, but these are actually all different things that you might even be able to blame on globalism more than anything. But he was pointing to sort of this, what caused this acceptance of mass migration, and the demographic shift away from WASPs was caused by capital L liberalism. And again, that's a bit too reductive to describe what's really going on, but he continues on here. He says a second game changer for ethno-traditional conservatism was the retreat of the religious right. In the late 70s, the Republicans began to target white evangelicals, a group which increased dramatically over the course of the 20th century due mainly to higher conservative Protestant birth rates, though defection from liberal denominations played a partial role. Some of these voters went for Jimmy Carter in 1976, a fellow evangelical from Georgia, but had yet to throw their lot in with either party. This changed when two Catholic Republicans, Richard Viguerie and Paul Weyrich, joined Howard Phillips, a Jewish convert to evangelicalism. They forged links with the Southern Baptist preacher Jerry Falwell to create the Moral Majority, a Christian right political coalition.
You can read about this whole thing in the new Right Papers that was put together by Sam Francis. Richard Viguerie is a very well-known figure in coalition building and getting the new right of the 1970s and 80s together.
I got that on the list. It just keeps getting pushed.
It's a great series of essays, like, and you get really depressed because you realize that it's very similar to everything that we've experienced in the last 10 years, where it's like, as soon as an election happens, everyone's like fighting to get a position or to like maintain ideological control over the movement that got them elected. And as we kind of know that these guys kind of lost, but also didn't. It's a mixed bag.
Yeah, I have that on the list. I've had it there for a year and a half. And I decided instead to do a lot of reading on hermeneutics. And now I don't want to fucking
that copy of the new Right Papers I own is a very prized possession because it's signed by Sam Francis.
Man,
Sorry, I had to flex.
Yeah, hand me the talking gun so I could blow my fucking brains out.
Move off, as the kids say.
Said at the elite level, the religious right was universalist, not white nationalist. Its founding involved a collaboration between Catholics, a Jew, and a Southern WASP, which is really what that book Tri-Faith America is about. It features a lot in this area about the religious coalition, the moral majority, the joining of forces, or rather the joining of forces of the Jews and Catholics to de-seat Protestant power. And then, just kind of bring it into this vague religious moralism that has effectively persisted to this day. So you still have people saying things like Judeo-Christian as if that fucking means anything, right?
Well, I mean, in its academic use, it was heavily used to examine like first century like Jewish Christian communities. Then it was sort of adopted here as a way to incorporate a part of a growing coalition. But the problem with a lot of coalitional politics is that it doesn't matter how big the majority is. Like the minority has the leverage because they're the ones that make the coalition work. And so that phrase has now been utilized and radically been separated and divorced from its original terminology. But again, that also has a lot to do with how many individuals from like the Pale settlement we let into the country during the early 20th century.
Yeah, and what I liked in this book was, I feel like this isn't explaining the full picture, but I don't know where to find more information on this, but he's talking about sort of the global rise of what was happening in America, sort of the counterculture movement that might have been exported by America, but you saw a concern, like an anti-racism mentality start to propagate all throughout the Western world around the same time. And he said, actually, let me just skip ahead for 295. Here we go. All right, it says, in the culture more broadly, beginning in the 80s, a trinity of left modernist sacred values, race, gender, and sexuality, greatly expanded their reach, prompting the phrase politically correct to come into common parlance. Political correctness refers to speech violations of left modernist taboos. But what is a reasonable trade-off between sensitivity and freedom of expression, he asks. Whatever one's view, it's clear that the period beginning in the late 80s features a logarithmic increase in the use of the terms racist, sexist, and political correctness as the 1960s radicals began to set the cultural tone. Now, here's where it gets interesting. So, this is what I was just talking about. Similar processes occurred in other Western countries. In German, Rassistich followed a straight line trajectory from 1960 to the mid 80s before tracking the English trend of reaching an apogee in the late 1990s. In French, racisme, racisme.
I'm reminded of when Eric Zemmour was running for office and le wokisme.
Yeah, that French racism has a straight line ascent from 1950, but shows the same upward growth. Between 1960 and 2008, the use of racist increased fivefold in Spanish, Italian, and French, tenfold in German, and 15-fold in English. What's fascinating, however, is that in Russian, the only East European country tracked on Google Books, mentions of racist emerged in the 1940s and 1950s, but remained stable thereafter at levels similar to those recorded for English in 1960. Whatever cultural change led to the rise of the word's usage in Western Europe doesn't seem to have affected Russia. I suspect the trend in Eastern Europe is closer to Russian than English, reflecting an increasingly important East-West values divide within Europe's elite culture and institutions. And I just wanted to mention that because we have been talking mostly about America, but he does have a global scope in this, and there's a lot to unpack there. I'm sure. I'm looking to see if Geo's in the the James' pronunciation. It's like I'm not allowed to fuck up. Like I'm not allowed to fuck up on a Tuesday. Let's see. You have a perfect Tuesday, by the way. But
Does that exist? Is there such thing as a perfect Tuesday?
Can Perfect Tuesday guys raise their fucking hand right now? I just mentioned Russia.
It just sounds like an agile meeting thing with like just a lovely HR lady. It's like, who's ready to have a perfect Tuesday? Come on and raise your hands on the Microsoft Teams meeting.
Oh shit! It uploaded on my Telegram gifts. Shit! Fuck! Oh no!
I would be in so much trouble if my Telegram gifts came in because I have like the Chud Jack face that just like rotates like it's the fucking giant head that floats around, and that what is it, Zardotsk movie with fucking what's his name?
Yeah,
Zardoz.
Sean Connery.
Yeah.
Which is
I have that one.
Don't let people tell you that you need to enjoy that movie. Ironically, by the way. It's a great standalone
I think it's a banger. I don't care what anyone says. I think it's a banger.
Nerds convinced me when I was young. It's like, no, you got to watch it like Plan 9 from Outer Space. Like it's so fucked up. I want to slaughter so many nerds for leading me. Like I'm making it so I can't enjoy these movies right from the jump. Look, here we go. The gun is good. The gun is good. Quotable movie, relevant film. So he goes. I don't know how much time I guess we have time. We
have plenty of time.
He goes into Britain for quite some time, but
I don't really want to comment on England, in part because it's not my place, and also that I think their problems are uniquely different than ours. Although what I will say is that Kaufmann does do a very good job at pointing the through line between Blair's opening of the borders and Blair's speechwriter Andrew Nader or something like that, famously saying that he wants to open up the borders so they can rub the Tories' nose in it. There's a discussion on the BNP and then their fall from grace, and of course it kind of basically getting banned from polite society, and then of course the rise of UKIP, and of course then Brexit, but also that the Conservatives had been in power at that time for over a decade and they had done nothing to reduce immigration at all.
There's this part that is buried in the part on Britain here that I gotta highlight this.
Yeah.
Because it was highlighted. Where is it? Okay. Here we go. Here's where it starts. Let me just zoom out so we can get all of it here. I'm just going to read here. So, further north, the Netherlands had been one of the first countries to break the elite consensus against criticizing multiculturalism. Fritz Bolkenstein of the center. Oh, this you're gonna love where this is going.
I'm all ears.
Fritz Bolkenstein of the center-right VVD argued that the early 1990s that immigrants should integrate to the Dutch way of life. So began a new era of anti-immigration politics. In 2001, Pim Fortuyn, a charismatic, openly gay member of Bolkenstein's VVD, left to form his own party. In a new departure, he criticized Islam from a liberal perspective as a threat to gays, freedom of expression, and social liberalism. Dutch openness was contrasted with Muslim conservatism. When Fortune was gunned down, by an animal rights activist in 2002, a very Netherlandish thing to happen, he became a martyr, and his party, the Pim Fortune list, won 70% of the vote. In 2006, the Dutch government introduced a package for prospective immigrants, which included a film showing nude women sunbathing and gay men kissing. Though a perfectly legitimate expression of Dutch liberalism, the commercial also appeals to nationalism, in that liberalism serves a marker of Dutchness against the Muslim mother. Fortune's, quote, homo nationalism created a template which Northern European populist right parties like the Danish People's Party and Front National eagerly copied. For people who were alive during this time, this did happen. And you did see echoes of this.
Well, it
throughout
also
America.
happened in the succeeding, sort of political anti-immigration parties. Like Geert Wilders had also had gay pride parades done in mostly Muslim neighborhoods as well.
Yeah, and I'm reminded of the infamous video of Gavin McInnes kissing Milo Yiannopoulos for far too long to make a point, right? But that was what it was. Like, you don't like Islam. What do Muslims hate? What do they hate more than anything?
Well, it's also
they hate sex.
It's like if those who remember the Triggly Puff woman at the Steven Crowder event, where, again, keep in mind that Crowder is defending Milo by saying that he is a gay man with a black husband. Social conservative, Steven Crowder, everybody. But long story short, Triggly Puff got a PhD and teaches about prison liberation and has a university job. Like, you can go look this up. Like, I'd say she won, because where's Milo now?
Yeah, well, and also in the video where people saw Triggly Puff, and for people who don't recall, that's the extremely obese woman who's freaking out at one of Milo's talks, because they used to pay him to just go talk to schools and riff for an hour, have no prepared remarks to
and the change my mind thing too.
Yeah, and oh yeah, Steven Crowder did impromptu stand up. That was a wild time. You could just do shit. You could just do bad.
You could be a
shit.
right-wing theater kid and just do shit if you were gay.
That was the salad days of being a right-wing theater kid. Like, Steven Crowder could get up there, gay as the day is long, and do like, oh yeah, I remember that Bill Burr set he did in Boston. I want to do that, and just have it not land, and no one, only fuckers like me remember it. So there's a section I have here, and this might be unfair, because we record these assuming that the authors are listening, but the heading here is Cope and Wrongness. Should we discuss that? These are points that I disagreed with.
Oh, sure. Yeah, let's hit them then.
And what made me not uncharitably assume that he's a liberal. He's got just a few comments here. So I'll just read a few of them. It says, money, not need, largely determines who comes to the West. Poor countries send few migrants because they can't afford to migrate. As they grow better off, more of them move. Middle-income countries send the most immigrants, but as countries pass an inflection point of $7,000, $8,000 income per head, they send fewer immigrants. Demographically expanding countries send more than those with a mature age structure. Those in rich, aging countries move at low rates, which is why European migration to North America declined sharply in the late 20th century. Now, that doesn't sound like... I think that would just be, I'd be quibbling over terminology there, where it would be true to say that migrants in the technical term, in the technical definition rather, are of a certain economic background, but the amount of refugees or fake refugee claims has ballooned, and I would just group that under all of it as migration. So, like, I don't think that poor countries send less quote unquote migrants because they also send lots of refugees. Or and when you say like countries send, I don't like that terminology, because that's like saying, the government is sending them. And sometimes it happens, but it's more common to see a student come over, become an anchor child, and bring the rest of their family. Like, what is that called? That might not be directed by the state. Sometimes it is, but you know what I mean? Like, I just, it seems like a very narrow and reductive way of describing the multivariant problem of mass migration and all the different pathways they take. And you know what I mean? Like, is what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I mean, like, this is a very valid point. Like, this is explicitly framed on the grounds of immigration. This is not talking about. I mean, Kaufmann does acknowledge the refugee crisis of 2015 and the subsequent, trying to accommodate them. But I mean, it's not just immigrants, although like you can't call them there. And also, like, we do have, like, even on the page here, you have refugee claimants, but like it's all one thing. In my basic point, it is that very thing. It's not just immigration. I think this is where conservatives in general have like the problem with immigration in terms of how it's worded, because the popular phrase that a lot of like Republicans in the US will say is like, well, I don't like illegal immigration, but I'm fine with legal immigration. And it would be different if we were talking about, like, we still had a quota system where we're only allowing people in from like Norway, Denmark, France, and England to come to the United States. Like, it'd be a totally different story. But instead, as it's been revealed, and that doesn't really, even this issue doesn't get mentioned in Kaufmann's book at all too much, is the H-1B visa system, where basically entire swaths of America's most vital technological infrastructure, social media, and the infrastructure that goes behind it, web browsing, basically surveillance, has all been taken over by Indians. Like, in any other part of the world or any other part in history, if a foreign ethnic group were to take over vital industry, that's an act of war. And we don't look at immigration for what it is, which is biological warfare.
So we got Nathaniel Bergstein. Fortune was a pedo, wasn't he? I don't know anything about the politician. Maybe.
I have no idea.
That would be the icing on the gravy, if true. But and there's another part here that I think I disagree with. It says the tragedy is that there will be no need for offshore processing of claimants, refugees he's speaking of here. Claimants could be housed in secure, clean facilities in Europe without the prospect of permanent settlement. Building secure refugee facilities in the rich countries is the best way forward for the following reasons. Where third countries are close to refugees, those fleeing can be transported over them safely to rich countries so they won't die. This is the basic idea of the term refuge. Western publics are more likely to accept the financial burden of housing refugees on a long-term basis than accepting them as permanent settlers, because they care about the cultural impact of refugee settlement more than economic costs. So this, again, I'm not sure this aged well. He's saying that, it would be better for us to have refugee camps where they're in the nation but kept apart. And he's saying that it would be an easy sell to that because our liberals don't want them to be assimilated anyway. And I'm like, well, we've had that.
You're going to create facilities in which they're separate from the public under this post-war mythology? Are you kidding me? Sorry, like, on face, that's just ridiculous, because the moment you set up something, we're just going to keep them away. We're going to have a refugee processing facility, but not in my backyard. Someone's just going to scream that's just like the camps and never again.
He goes here, this will offer refuge but not settlement, so only those genuinely fearing for their lives will remain. There would be no need to engage in the impossible task of sorting genuine refugees from economic migrants. Like, you read this now and you're like, oh, he's being sarcastic, right? But maybe he didn't know that back then, but I think it must have been going on at the time, though, right? Like, am I wrong? I guess the timelines are getting blurred here, but anyway, point being that we tried that. That's been happening.
Well, we also didn't cut welfare anywhere.
Yeah.
Instead, we robbed the collective Peter to pay for refugee Paul.
Hey, you know what it'll do? Well, look at this, number 6. Refugees on Western soil will concentrate more minds on the problems in trouble spots, pressing for a solution.
So just more money, more Gibbs.
It's almost like at that point in the list, he's treating it like a threat. Like if we bring them here, we're gonna need to have a solution because why? Why? Is it because you hate having them here? Is it because they're a problem when they're here? If you're kind of tacitly admitting that they're a problem that you need to solve, you can just not do it. You could just not do it. You could just not bring them in and build a nice new building for them just to sit around in. And like selling it as a concentration camp. It's like, no, just call it something else. First of all, they're going to hate that. They're going to try and put them in your apartment building right away, which they started to do. And now everyone's raped. I don't know if you guys have noticed. Maybe you have if you exist in the world, but everyone's raped. Oops. Sorry. Oops, all rape.
That's a cereal I don't want to open.
We're getting to that point in the show.
We sure are. The other thing I thought was interesting is that majority of for instance, I mentioned H-1B visas earlier, not really talked about at all in the book. Indians from the Indian subcontinent, not really discussed outside of the fact that they oppose immigration restrictionism, and they, like many Latin America and Caribbean countries, India also shares a color stratification / caste system wherein light skin is promoted, and skin whitening cream is heavily promoted in places like the Caribbean, parts of sub-Saharan Africa, and parts of East Asia.
Yeah, that I didn't even notice that when I was reading it. Someone else pointed out that he didn't. I guess this would be grouped under the UK, but he didn't mention Scotland or Ireland specifically, and they were positing that this is because his mother was like Scots-Irish or something. But yeah, there's a few places that are missed. A certain, like, even back then, maybe the narrative was that Indians are okay. Remember that? Everyone said, no, at least they're not like the Sikhs. They're based. They carry knives, right? They're our friends, and you know nothing about them. It wasn't funny how everyone said Indians were awesome while know nothing about.
Thanks,
Indians.
Tommy Robinson.
Yeah, thanks. Man, how many crypto scams is that asshole gonna run? I count 4. Like, I've never seen a bigger grifter. I hesitate to say I'm in awe, but I love a shameless scam.
I mean, there's also the moral thing too on the stratification or caste aspect too that I think also sort of betrays the issue. I, for instance, see the various issues of someone is blowing up my phone. Sorry about that. So back on point, like, for instance, Kaufmann finds a lot of this stuff lamentable. Like he describes advantages accrue to those that are lighter skin. He says that this lamentable system of color stratification wherein those of lighter complexion are overrepresented in higher castes or position, usually because historically throughout world history, the conquerors for various regions had lighter skin. He sends this on page 435. Aryans in India, Persian, Turkic, Afghan, Mughals in India, Pakistan, Arabs in Muslim Africa, Iberians in Latin America. The mixed race whites, because of the future, may be at risk of moving towards a color-coded hierarchy because Caucasian features are associated with higher status. I mean, you could argue that for like a Latin Americanization of things. I mean, even with blacks in America, there's the whole light-skinned versus dark-skinned thing. And these things, I think, are inevitable with the amount of intermixing there may or may not occur. I don't think you're going to get the beige future that Kaufmann speculates at the end of this text. If anything, our social polarization, if anything, I think your ability to, for instance, most ethnic mixing or interracial marriages I see come in 2 forms, and it's on like a bell curve, where at the low end, it's the low classes, things that would be considered trashy or ghetto or downwardly mobile, or you're really fucking wealthy and you can afford to not really care and you can have the pick of whatever you choose, whether it's because you're passport broing or because you're in elite liberal circles where openness is fine and you can choose to partake in whatever fetish of the week that you're participating in. Whereas like for most people, they tend to stay in group, and most people have a particular focus inwardly, with maybe some exceptions for religious purposes. But he talks about it in the text that most immigrants that come to like Europe, for instance, Turks have the highest degree of we're never going to marry outside of the group. Whereas, and he goes through the degree of immigrants that do it, but for most they tend to stay in it. But as time passes and they become upwardly mobile economically, their openness to leaving behind the faith or marrying someone who's not a Muslim changes, not specifically Turks, but others who come to, say, like Germany, for example, or England. That happens. But even then, it's not to the degree in which the media represents it. And of course, the media does a very good job through cultivation theory, making us think that this is happening at rates much higher than we believe, when it usually isn't. Yes, has like white openness to interracial marriage increased over the last 10 years? Yes, but with like white women, it went from like 2 to 4%. And with white men, I think it went from like 8 to 11. So not a significant degree, but I mean, it still shows that like the internal groups, and again, go back to the evangelical question from earlier in the episode, they're the ones that still have higher TFRs than everybody. And those guys are pretty lily white.
You know what's interesting, and I'm going to say this is bore out anecdotally, but I've seen some research on this. But if you know anything about Indians, it's true when he says, and you were saying at the top, that white attributes or, it's not, what's that? Not phrenology. You know, the one where it's the study of the face. Why am I blanking?
Physiognomy?
Physiognomy, yeah. There's certain physiognomical aspects of like white faces that are marks of high status within high caste Indians, or really the higher caste of any society, including South Americans. But what I found with Indians is they will laud and they will, glorify white characteristics, but still hate white people.
Yeah.
They still hate the British guy. Like, and you just need to keep that in reality, because I see the sort of logical leap he's making here that, well, aspects of whiteness will be embraced. Like, well, that happens right now. And that's the problem we're having with Indians, is that they think whites are beneath it. They don't like whiteness. And if you start dissecting parts of whiteness, they can just they'll just appropriate it while still saying, fuck white people. And which is what they do. So I don't know. It's too optimistic, and really that's just the heart of what I'm trying to say, is that I don't want to be too optimistic. I don't think that as the white genetic core of whiteness declines, that it's just going to be. I don't know, it's just like that. It's like the scene in Lord of War where he lands the plane in Uganda and they just pick it apart and use it as like. Make like a part of the wing for a mule hat, right? That's gonna be whiteness.
Yeah, and also at the same time, again, just because it's a product of being published in 2018, the trying to understand the mechanisms behind white grievance politics and populist right-wing voting. He spends a long time in what chapter is this in? It's the subsection Return of the Repressed, and this is discussing, of course, the rise of populist immigration. It's in chapter 8, Left Modernism versus the Populist Right. He spends a lot of time talking about the Evergreen College saga. And also 8.1 is the little graph that he shows, which is sort of the erosion of anti-racism taboos in the West, which is that he said that the Eastern Europeans were closer to white identity, Christian identity, and white nationalism in the 2010s, whereas the United States in 2015 is past immigration, multiculturalism, and now we're talking about how awful Islam is. And I mean, if we're now going to look at it in 2026, I would say the United States on the political right has a large degree of individuals echoing, if not outright discussing, I would say, pretty white identitarian talking points, whether it's either an explicitly religious language, racial language. It's basically there. A nation is its people, America for Americans. Those sort of rhetoric is there. But one of the things I thought was particularly interesting later on in the book was the discussion about quote unquote experience. And of course, our ability to have, white flight gets discussed. Which of course is just that Europeans will, and by that this is talking about Britain at first, talking about London, but Eastern European or non-European minorities grew the quickest, experienced the largest white British losses, and so as soon as you see it coming, people tend to leave, and that's sort of where that's sort of how things are. And we've noticed that in rural places like in Idaho, there has been substantial growth in white demographics moving to the state over the last 30 years and getting away either from California or other parts of the country. And he doesn't mention the famous Rosedale study, which I thought was really depressing. But at the same time, talking about leaving diverse areas, he does note, and the data seems to indicate that what he calls intolerant whites will leave, leaving liberal whites to enjoy the diversity. So white conservatives, once they experience some diversity, they don't differ too much from white liberals. I haven't found the same pattern amongst white pro and anti-Trump voters, where the data quality is far lower in the United States based off of Twitter profiles. But it seems to be that whites will move to more whiter areas, and that the average white majority ward or conclave is 8% whiter, or 8 points higher than the national average white population.
I love that. I've neglected to mention that, but he gets to that early on, and he was saying that it cuts across politics. And that's something that most people can intuit, and if they've just watched how white people behave, it's like the liberals, for all their proclamations, will still prefer majority white areas. We all know that.
Yeah.
And you can call it out, but it's not going to do anything. It's just the fact of the matter that, and I think it even might trend more towards that conservatives enjoy more racially diverse, like in a marginal sense, but it's that the liberals are the real racists, right? As if, like, I don't know if that's positive or negative. I don't even think that's a fact, but it seems to be that regardless of ideology or political affiliation, whites seem to behave a certain way, and that doesn't seem to affect either blacks or browns or beiges or however you want to define it. Like, the blacks don't behave that way. They're cool living amongst each other, I guess. But I also think he doesn't get into it in this book, but just based on stuff I've read, I just think they're more accustomed to a low trust situation. Like, white people want to live in a high trust area, which requires living around white people, but an all black area is already low trust, right? And then if a black person is an all white area, they're also in a low trust situation. Like, they're just the only people who have experience with or desire a high trust community or society, I think, are white people. And that's on a global scale.
Certainly, what he's discussing in the text, towards the whole section on, like, do white people leave diverse neighborhoods? It's just that, let's see here. Also talking about that, the Asian presence is the elephant in the room. There's a joke there to be made somewhere for white flight or avoidance. When talking about Jonathan Haidt's writings on these issues, our conscious rationalization or for subconscious decisions, the writer, namely the liberal rationale that white children will be adversely affected by competitive Asian students and will perform better in a more holistic scholastic environment. As it is written, according to one of the authors here that's cited on section 48, the white parents in Johns Creek, who in the same breath decry the police killings.
Sorry, was that page 48?
No, page 380. It's just the footnotes 48 for the section. Do not hesitate to tell me they do not want their children measured against Asians. And Genti's report seems consistent with what large-scale data is telling us. White liberals, like white conservatives, are generally avoiding super diversity, especially when they settle down and have kids. The biological imperative is to avoid it. The revealed preference is there. And education is the greatest indicator for how they're going to act. And also, polarization in our politics is heavily correlated positively that when our politicians in Congress is more polarized, where the most liberal Democrat is still further apart, or the most liberal Republican is still further apart from the most conservative Democrat, it is a strong correlation between the U.S. population and its diversity and the polarization of the House of Representatives.
Now, Evolvus Persona is saying hoops, not height. Now, I don't know if that's a real correction or if that's a basketball joke.
Oh, that's probably. I have no idea. Oh well. I'm gonna fuck something up when I say it.
We're just a couple of Tuesday guys. Now,
No one gets a perfect Tuesday.
we should probably focus more on the hybridization aspect, which
Yeah,
we've alluded
let's
to.
get there, because at the end, from 395 onward, we're gonna get a discussion about tribalism, exit, and voice. And then, of course, the question about joining. So, we, of course, the book is broken up into really 4 big sections, which is fighting immigration and demographic change, repressing the history of how European peoples have repressed the semblance of what's known as racism. 3, of course, white flight and how we do that. And then part 4 is about joining. The question about mixing, molding, and interracial marriage. He seems to be very inclined to think that eventually some sort of degree of mixing is going to happen, just as we have assimilated other groups. I don't know how true that's going to be, but we'll see how it goes. Whites in the South tend to disapprove of interracial marriage, as in the same way that blacks in the South tend to disapprove of interracial marriage. A lot of this is going to be brought out in terms of the dating. Muslim South Asians were no likely to marry out than Sikhs. Religion is an important part of this, of course, when it comes to various different groups in the United States. And then, of course, the mixed race component of unions is 17% in the United States, approximately 4% in Britain, 5% in Canada. This is written in 2018, and the stat that he is citing from is from a 2013 HuffPost article, which I'm sure is citing something else that has that study included into it. So that's what we're dealing with. The rise in the relaxation of attitudes to black to white intermarriage facilitated a rise in the share of black newlyweds marrying outside of their race from 5% in 1980 to 18% in 2015. So much so, that's from the HuffPost article. So much so in 2013 that an American's Cheerios commercial featured a black-white interracial couple and their mixed-race daughter. This was considered controversial by some Americans and drew negative commentary from racist groups on social media. Gee, I wonder why, because almost every commercial is a fucking interracial couple in the United States. I wonder why.
You say the HuffPost there. Is the HuffPost even around anymore?
The Huffington Post is still alive. I hate to break it to you.
Hey, remember the time we let a bitch start a newspaper? Anyway, we got to...
Remember when Ariana Huffington was considered conservative?
Remember when Ariana Huffington was considered fuckable? Let's go. Let's fucking go.
Oh, last time that was true, Andrew Breitbart was still alive.
Yeah, the mixed race component. I don't think this is what you covered. The mixed race component of unions is 17%.
No, I did just cover that.
Okay,
yeah.
good. Yeah, sorry. I thought there's a whole part about numbers here. I'm going to skip ahead to 410.
In continental Europe, there is no census data on ethnicity, but shows that Christian or secular minorities intermarry at higher rates than non-Christian minorities. One study found that European-born Muslims marry out more than their parent or immigrant generation. Algerian French are the outlier driving this increase. Half married out in 1992. Afro-Caribbeans on the European continent tend, as in Britain, to intermarry at higher rates. In the Netherlands, 26% of the immigrant generation of Caribbeans married native-born whites, rising to 53% in the second generation. Another study found that rate to be 50 to 70%. Keep in mind that's from the that's from 2009 actually. So there you go.
And here's the section everyone wants to hear from: the future of white majorities.
There you go.
Of course. So there's a part here. It's therefore time to think about the ethnic future of Western nations, and within this, of the white majorities that comprise between 62 and 95% of the population of Western countries. There are 3 major possibilities. 1, ethnic unmixing, in which minorities leave or are forced to leave, resulting in a return to 1950s levels of homogeneity.
That would be nice.
I bet there's a lot of fans of that in the chat. A melting pot, in which the white group melts with others, forming a larger or smaller component of the total depending on the openness of its ethnic boundaries, or a new hybrid majority emerges. 3, a salad bowl, which sounds much gayer, in which whites remain a tight bounded group but become an ever diminishing share of a multicultural society of discrete groups, which is what we're seeing more of in Canada. I'd argue in America as well. There's not much of a melting pot attribute to it.
No.
And I should also say that, like, I think it's inevitable, and you somewhat addressed this, to have a low percentage of inter-ethnic or interracial relationships on the periphery of ethnicity or a nation, right? Like, you're always going to have that. But if it's small enough, it is marginal. Like, it almost doesn't matter. Like, that's always happened, but it was so, like, people would always throw numbers about what is the actual rate of interracial relationships. It's still relatively low. It's still pretty uncommon. It's popularized in the media, propagandized in the media, but the revealed preference seems to indicate that white people tend to prefer each other. Asian people especially tend to prefer each other in larger numbers, despite the generations of propagandization. But, like, you're always going to have it, and it can be seen as negligible. Like, you would always have in America a white guy with a native wife. Yeah, he's kind of weird. He's kind of kooky. He's one of those people. But it wasn't a threat to the identity of the larger people. And so with Melting Pot, you're like, okay, it's just a question of numbers. And that's really what people are talking about. It's just there's so much that it threatens the integrity of the whole. And so I think you are seeing interracial relationships trend up. But like we said before, you had that great point at the start, around the time, I believe it's around the time Trump was elected, you start seeing the numbers of Hispanics go down on censuses, but that was more of a case of them calling themselves white, right? So,
well,
there's
and
a
also
corruption
more
of the
importantly,
data.
more importantly, the inverse. They've been doing it less actually. Fewer Hispanics identify as white today. One, because we've changed the U.S. Census. That way we can identify Hispanic heritage as a distinct identity according to the Pew Research Center on this issue. But also in part because they have been, they've kind of, it's been decreasing. So contesting whiteness, according to the UC Davis School of Law, we've been we invented the term Hispanic, and Latino, of course, isn't considered a race by some. I know La Raza has changed their name on these things. But a lot of Hispanics, this starting in 2014, was like, why are they naming or identifying as white? A new study of census returns reported by the Pew Research Center, this is in 2014, mind you, showed that the significant number of Hispanics are now identifying as white. The research was presented in the recent Population Association of America meeting. Some news reports suggesting Hispanics, rather than solidifying as a distinct ethnic identity, are becoming the driving force, a majority-minority future, might try to instead become the latest group of immigrants, such as Italians and Jews, to, quote, become white. It's a real shift, and if it's real, it accordingly would have such big implications. Think about national politics, where the Republican Party plays to a shrinking, aging, and increasingly anxious base of white voters. If a large number of Hispanics were to start thinking of themselves as white, that could alter the rhetoric and calculations of the Republican Party. Well, that certainly that did not happen because we kind of went nuts in 2016, now didn't we? But I mean, Hispanics identifying as white has kind of emerged out of the Trump era. During the Obama and Biden years, it kind of went down as there was this elite consensus to identify as Latino or the terrible Latinx thing. But more recently, that has changed, and more Latin American immigrants are trying to declare themselves as white.
They're trying to blame Latinx on white women. What I tell you, white women.
I blame it on the brat.
Yeah, I blame. I don't blame everything on Kamala Harris, by the way. But white women are left holding the bag for like everything in society. Remember, we called it
when white women are the ones that really do stay in group more than anybody else, outside of like super niche religious minorities like ultra Orthodox Jews.
Remember, give it some more time. They're going to blame trans hysteria on white women, and they're not going to.
No, I agree wholeheartedly,
and they'll accept it, which is unfortunate. But We got a little, not a graph, but an image here. Whites in the contemporary West on the right, tightly knit. Whites in the future West, many close to racial boundary, spread apart. Um, I'm reminded, and I don't think we brought this up on a previous episode, but there's this really interesting story that people were trading, maybe a couple months ago, and it was a meetup, probably New York or somewhere in LA, but between Hapas. This would have been half white, half Asian.
Oh, that weird Wasian meetup they
Yeah,
called
call
it New York.
Maybe Hapa's right wing coded. I thought that was just what they were called, but Wasians, which I don't.
I've
care
never
for.
heard of that term until I saw that article about that meetup, and I was like, "There's no way that that's the term people use."
Yeah, it sounds.
But I also don't know a lot of quote unquote Wasians or Hapas in real life. I've met one, and he's from Australia. I met Barack Obama, and that's the only Hapa I've met in recent.
Oh, he is
memory.
Interesting.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is known. This is known.
But so they were getting a lot of shit because they were half white, half Asian, and that was the entire meetup. And all of the half Asian, half Indians, half Asian, half blacks, I don't know what you call them, Blasians, I guess. They're like, well, why weren't we invited? And so you start to see, even within that group, an ethnogenesis starting to form, that everyone knows that, okay, it's not just Asian mixed with whoever.
It's Asians mixed with whites.
And whites, they go over here. They're their own people. And the Asian mixed with blacks, it into the fucking trash with them. Basically. But really, though. And
Well, it just goes back to the like stratification thing, because it's like you notice this, like Twitter is not real life, but a large extent it is, or like where you'll see like some like Indian woman complain that like they're not wanted by a white guy. Or like you'll see a web comic that someone makes and they're like, oh, I would love an Asian person. And then it's like, well, pick me. And it's like, you're Indian. And it's like, well, yeah, that's how it's going to be. You don't fit within the stereotypical definition of what people are wanting, which is whatever. I think it kind of just shows that there is a degree of preference, which is, yeah, it's outside my group, but like it's white enough. I think when it comes to like the Japanese question or something like that.
Can I just call attention to one of the many great comments by
of course.
Hugh Janus saying, wow, awesome diagram. And he has called me on my bullshit. This is a dumb diagram. You think that just
all of the diagrams are like this in the book, by the way.
You think just because it's in a book, it must be smart. You could have had just a fucking hand turkey in there. It'd be like, wow, great point.
So yeah, he really does come to the conclusion that like mixed populations are going to be the rising population by the beginning of the next century, which I just don't see happening. Call me crazy.
Oh, Larger Potato made a good point. Almost like how the Métis became a thing, which is what we have. I don't know if you have those in America, but it's like the mix of Aboriginal and French. And they just made a new type of guy. So again, like I call attention to the fact that like with the Wasians, this is happening.
I love
right now.
that you guys created like your own Hapa for Indian, like native, the Indians of North America, and then you named them after a Greek god.
Yeah.
There's something about that just strikes me as so French.
And it'd be like, oh, they must be awesome, right? They're not. They're just hanging around. They're not anything.
Well, we have that too in the United States with our Indians as well. Not feather, not gas station. Feather, not dot. Casino, not gas station. Our casino Indians, for instance, have a high degree of. They have retained a large degree, I think, of some of their Indian features, but also at the same time, they've heavily bred outward with whites to where if you were to drive in any part of southern Oklahoma, you'll see the Choctaw Nation have their billboards introducing themselves and their chief. And go look this up. Actually, while we're here, we're going to just have a fun time. Can you guess? I just want you to guess the first name of the current chief of the Choctaw Nation. Just guess.
Okay. Fuck, I only got one shot at this.
You got one shot at
fun.
this. Just guess.
Penis.
Okay. Well, his name is Gary.
Okay. That's close.
Go look him up. Gary Batten is his name. This guy is as white as shit. chief of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma.
Gary Penis. Gary Penis casino owner, is that
Gary Batten, Batton. So you'll drive in Oklahoma where the Choctaw Nation has like authority or some jurisprudence, and it'll be like Halito, which is their word for hello, and then it's just like the two whitest motherfuckers you have ever seen, and they're like, we're the tribal leaders, and we have.
I will say this guy does look Indian as shit though. Like compared
I mean,
to
a
some
little
ones I've
bit.
seen.
But like your name is Gary Batten, and this is sort of the weird thing too that Kaufman talks about in the book, where it's just like, what do you do with people like Ted Cruz? And I'm like, well, Ted Cruz isn't white. Like, what are we? He's a Cuban Canadian who happens to be a Texas senator. In the same way, Marco Rubio is not white. Like, he's also a Cuban Secretary of State who just happens to be very light skinned.
What do you do with Ted Cruz? You put him in the penis cubaning chamber.
You put him in the flattening chamber. Like, just I'm looking forward to primarying Ted Cruz the next election cycle. I want him gone.
Put him in the ass exploding device.
Just give him a pager.
Give him a page. Here's what we do: blow him up, blow him the hell up. So just a couple more points here, because he gets into the finer details about how this process takes place, and he says, where it is on the page here? I'll just read.
Yeah, and also there's the conversation about assimilation. Like, again, the thing, this text, and what kind of irks me, and maybe this is just because we're 8 years out, and of course 8 years doesn't mean anything in like the long scale of time in which Kaufman is writing about here. But what frustrates me is that it's like there's no incentive to turn this into a mishmash, and also the very question of assimilating or marrying out groups is part of the culture war. The sort of like kumbaya universalist, we're all going to be open, we're all going to be like, the National Geographic said this is what Americans will look like by 2050, and it's beautiful. No one actually wants that at all. And why would you ever want to assimilate when you were financially and politically incentivized to never do so? This is why Frisco looks like Mumbai. This is why you have Muslim-only towns. This is why every Republican in Texas right now is talking about communism and Islam. That's it. There's no mention, like Israel doesn't even get mentioned anymore at Republican fundraisers. It's just Islam and communism, democratic socialists, tranny freaks. But there's no discussion about like, well, you know, legal immigration. It's about deportations. And even now, like when we look at the sort of question about, well, when things in the sort of imperial periphery change, what happens? Well, with France, we saw that with Algeria. The French were ethnically cleansed. We saw this in Kazakhstan. The Russians were ethnically cleansed despite a policy of trying to instill a Russian majority in the area during the years of the Soviets. And we saw from the 1990s and even today, there's a lot of left-wing, angry, nationalist, nativist, Hispanics, and Mexicans that have that sort of Aztlan plan where they want to reconquer parts of the American Southwest. Despite the fact that they didn't fucking live there because it was basically uninhabitable because of the Comanche and other Indians. Texas basically became the white Anglo part of the republic that it became because the Mexicans invited us over because they didn't settle it and they didn't want to deal with the Indians. That's a large part and parcel for it. Whereas, at the same time, when we're looking at what he's suggesting about the projected population, unless you're actively suppressing a population, even if they take a hit, they're going to make a comeback, which we've seen with like the native Hawaiian population, which is what he's discussed in the text. Whites, I think, in the large part are going to stay their own thing. I think that America will most likely have the mosaic aspect of it. We're all going to be different pieces trying to live in our own little enclaves, unless there is some reassertion of like a WASP, white Anglo, Protestant sort of dominant high culture. But right now that is yet to be seen because Trump is a deracinated New York Ellis Islander Germanic guy trained by Jews. Like, he doesn't pay too much attention to like religion, except saying religion is good and God is good. And so I think America overall is in a weird state of like, we're incredibly deracinated nationally, but regionally, I think we're seeing sort of a return to this as we're trying to vie for what will the national narrative be about the country.
Yeah. And just to map out what I think the future, and I talk about America, but I'm also relating this to Canada as well, though Canada is a different, and every Western country is different in its ethnic makeup, but using America as an example, like I envision a future because when we talk about, and we talk about this all the time, but we are going through right now a genetic bottleneck. The fertility crisis is hitting every group across the world. It's happening in China. It's actually happening in India. It's not really happening in Africa, but that's because their population is artificially kept afloat through foreign aid. But if you cut that off, I don't know how many times I've said this on the show, but it would drop significantly. But there's a genetic bottleneck happening around the world right now, and part of that's it's falling sperm rate, falling testosterone. It's everything. It's SSRIs. It's the fucking COVID vaccine. It's it's porn. It's just the carrying capacity of the planet. It's a big one too. Like there's a lot of factors that are affecting this, but I do think there's going to be groups of people that see to the other side of that genetic bottleneck, and you're seeing them mostly with whites, and you're seeing it with high income and high educated whites, which used to be the inverse. They used to be that it was lower class, lower educated whites that were reproducing the most, and that's flipped. So they're the primary consumers of abortion and fucking crack and Salisbury steak and all that stuff. So they're dying, humiliating death. While it seems that white nerds are doing okay, but I think they will be the ones that maintain the ethnic core of whiteness in America, and they tend to be right wing. In fact, they tend to be far right. Now, how that breaks down religiously or in the particulars of the ideology, that has its. I'm just saying generally they're grouped in a very pro-natal, more traditional sense, but also not anti-technology, things like that. And we could break it down in a lot of different ways. But I think what you're going to see is that, and you're going to see a population of Hapas of a fairly significant size and of pretty decent socioeconomic means. And then you're going to have Hispanics. And then those are going to be probably the dominant group. They're going to have blacks, but I think the black population is going to stay the same. I think, again, with revealed preference, I don't care how progressive you are, I don't think anyone wants to take abortions away from black women. So I bet their population is going to remain pretty static, but you're going to see, by 2050, I think you still see white people. I think they're from the people that are surrounding us right now. But you're going to see a lot of Hapas, and you're going to see a lot of Hispanics that are identifying as white, and Hapas that are identifying as white. And that's just what it's going to be. And I'm not making a value judgment on that. That just seems to be, if I'm forecasting what's likely to happen, it's that. So the good news is white people don't go extinct, white people don't go away. And in fact, they get to set the conversation of what whiteness is. And then you got, again, the total collapse of boomers. Boomers are gone by this point, and probably reconfiguration of what liberals are, and progressives and shit. And maybe there's a couple of civil wars in there too. But that's the ethnic makeup I see. But I still do see the definition of whiteness centered by white people. And that, in your opinion, maybe this is a good way to end. Does that seem too optimistic?
I don't know if it's too optimistic. I think that contrary to what Kaufmann describes towards the end in his speculation, what he calls the ethno-traditional nationalism, it's not going away anytime soon, especially when unmixed whites, we kind of can tell right now, if you're a white guy under the age of 30, your politics is in one way or the other, which is you're either to some extent a left-winger that has no problem with where things are going and would like them to actively be even more adverse to your own racial position in the American state of affairs, or you're on the right and you are of some degree anti-woke or anti-progressive, and you have some inkling or have a pretty wide berth of racial consciousness. That doesn't necessarily mean too much because, of course, revealed preferences go a long way. But I think that when we consider the future, There, of course, will be harder social pressures. I do agree that there's a genetic bottleneck happening right now. I do think religious whites of all shapes and sizes will do well. This includes our neo-pagan friends. They tend to have a lot of kids as well. I just think religious whites in general do pretty damn well for themselves. On top of all this, this isn't going to go away after Trump leaves office. You kind of can't put the racial identity thing back in the bottle, especially when I've got, Ethiopians and Hispanics and others all saying I should be killed. And also that you have to deal with the fact that this isn't going away just because it's policy in a lot of places. Lest we forget, and COVID happened in certain parts of the country, in Minnesota, in New York, and Dallas County, Texas, monoclonal antibody treatments were triaged based on racial identity. And if you were a white person with no pre-existing conditions and you got COVID, you were at the back of the line to receive monoclonal antibody treatment. That would have happened to me if I didn't have a kidney transplant. So I take the shit a little personally. I made that very clear in a heated conversation with my mother this last Sunday. She's like, well, why do you think the way that you do? And I just kind of basically told her, I said, every progressive I know wants me killed because I'm white. And that's an example to use. For me, overall, I have to be optimistic, because even if things do get shitty for me, because things are going to get really shitty in America, I think once the whitest generation, the boomers, do slip this mortal coil, that I just think that the coalition building will be difficult, because you are right, multiracial whiteness is going to be a thing to navigate. White Hispanic passing Hispanics or white mixed, or people who want to identify as white Hispanic are going to play a role as well in our politics. It'll be very regional in that regard. So it just depends, because we also have to deal with the fact that there are white liberals. And white liberals also marry whites and reproduce and make more white liberals, which is tragic. And that's an epigenetic phenomenon I almost want to investigate. But at the same time, I have to remain hopeful that, like, the future of America and the future of the West is not going to be just quietly mixed into a beige-brown oblivion, but instead either politically an answer is made or something else happens. And as the late Marshall McLuhan had once said, and I will let the reader understand, violence is a quest for identity, and things like that I feel may unfortunately persist into the future. But also, as with any need for identity and for people to survive, those things are also necessary.
I just want to hear more about this conversation with your mom. I want to peek behind the curtain.
You can get that after the show ends.
My mom asked me the same things. Like, so where do you land politically? I say, Ma, billions must die. And then she says, are you, billions? What do you mean by that? And I go, shut up. Just shut up, Ma. No one talk. You know what's great about being
I just like to think that you're in some kind of version of, like one of those old rural TV shows, like you're just you have like a large family household on like the prairie, and like everyone is just they're all dealing with like you're from the Waltons, and it's just like, good night, John Boy. Good night, Dimes. And it's like, shut up, Ma. Millions must die. It's just like, that's what I'm thinking about with you. It's just out somewhere in the fields.
Yeah, always remember, guys, you can just say things. This is why I'm in the blessed situation of whenever I'm at a family function, no one talks politics whatsoever, because I'm there. And they don't want to
actually. It's really nice.
It's great. They just like, it doesn't even come up. You forget. Like, I hang out with my family for a break from politics, because they know I'm going to be out of pocket in a way that they can't even comprehend.
Although I realized I'm probably going to turn into the racist uncle, and I don't know what to do about that. Like when the World Cup was going, they were just like, well, who are you rooting for? And I'm just like, whatever country resembles its national identity the most. So right now, Norway.
Yes, you're the old racist uncle. It's like, are you watching football? What are you, gay? What are you watching, a gay thing on TV? Interesting, fascinating. To a room full of like your fucking cousins, like your little cousins. What is this? Some gay nonsense? Hey everyone, it's me, America's Prudentialist. Just wearing your own merch.
Just giving away T-shirts at like family reunions and get-togethers. I'll see you later.
Wearing your own merch to a family function is so funny to me.
I only own one of my own merchandise, which is the mug that I had sent to me as a test. Like, this is the test product. And I was like, oh, this is perfect. And then I don't have anything else. Although I have been told that T-shirts and socks that I have with like my profile picture have been given at like right-wing meetup gift exchanges for Christmas, which I just think is hilarious that someone's at a Chinese gift exchange with a bunch of Twitter racists and it's like, I got Prudentialist socks, let's fucking go. And I'm like, you know what, life's pretty fucking good.
Yeah, I got a lot of merch that I don't know if I would wish on my worst enemies. So I got.
Can I tell you this story? We're gonna end with this story. Dime. Speaking of merchandise, we're gonna end with this story. Before we do though, what final thoughts on the book?
I mean, I like it. I mean, a lot of the stuff about what politically led us to this point, a lot of people will be familiar with. It's a good source. Like I think the book was released to introduce people to this idea who would not frequent our spaces. They wouldn't hear this anywhere else. So there's this new idea called Whiteshift. And so if some people, if it's mainstreaming the idea of white genocide in a sense, and he doesn't outright say that, he kind of does in the book, I think a couple times, but saying that, hey, all these pissed off white guys have a point. He's very clear about that. I'm like, okay, thank you. And he's talking about, honestly, I like anyone who's talking about like racial changes in very just realistic terms and not scared about talking about it. Like, basically admitting that us kooks and cranks have been right the entire time. But, you know, I think I disagree with enough, but it's not subversive. Like, he's pretty open about what he says. So I'm like, okay, if you disagree with it, you'll see what he's trying to do. Don't worry about getting brainwashed by anything. But I do think, like I said at the start, you might dislike what he's saying. You might disagree with some parts, but is he overall incorrect about the assessment of what's going on right now? I don't think he's incorrect. And I think this is a very urgent conversation right now because you're seeing multi-ethnic white nationalism get so popular and be integrated into the mainstream Republican Party. Like this is happening in front of us, and I think this is one of the few things really talking about it instead of just scoffing at it and dismissing it. But like, okay, let's say there's like we've seen the rise of wages and all this other shit. But what do you do about that? Anyway, it's a conversation starter. So yes, I'd recommend it. What do you think?
Yeah, and as I mentioned in the beginning, this book is worth its weight in its bibliography and its studies that are cited, and as well as with Kaufmann's own research. And I think that this is worth your time sort of trying to understand an academic point of view for how we got to here. It's an interesting snapshot, of course, of what led to the Trump era and the decades of open borders and globalism that kind of also contributed to the erasure of a national and ethnic identity in not just the United States, but in other parts of the world as well. And that even though he may be wrong in some places, I think the questions that he's forcing, which is explicitly white identity, and the question of what do we do with those that are trying to quote unquote assimilate, are questions we're going to have to grapple with for decades to come in our lifetime. And if you're my age, 30, and thinking about the next 30 years, as the old country song goes, then, you know, that is something that you have to consider. Like, how am I going to navigate? How am I going to engage politically? Who do I talk to? And how does that mean for me in my inability to have freedom of association? Overall, I would highly recommend reading the book. I can post the PDF on my Telegram later today, and y'all can read it if you want. Have a free copy, by all means. No need to waste your time at a bookstore getting money swindled away from you. Go spend that on us, merchandise, or to save up for a ticket when we have our live event later this year in November. So I think that you'll have a good time overall reading this text. There's a lot of dense stuff to discuss, and he isn't too speculative until he's talking about like the history of something or like the root cause, but also towards the end of the book. So I think that, you know, overall this is one of the drier texts that we've covered, but I think one of the more important ones to discuss.
Yeah, and I think this fits in very well alongside books like White Fragility, how Europe underdeveloped Africa. Like, I hope we're shining a light on the dynamism of this racial conversation that we're all dragged into, whether we like it or not. Okay, so we gotta get going. Fuck, we're almost at 2:20.
All right. We're gonna end with a merchandise story, and it's not even my merchandise. This is what makes it great. So I went to a conference. This is about 3 years ago at this point, and I know that this guy still listens to the show and he still listens to DA. So if you hear me, Mr. Bassett, fuck you. But here's the story. So I was at a conference, and this guy comes up, and it's the weirdest parasocial moment of my fucking life. He walks up to me, he's like, "Prudentialist, I got you a gift." And I'm like, "Oh, cool." That doesn't really usually happen to me at these kind of events. That's kind of awkward. I'm not big on the whole fandom thing. I will treat you like a normal person if I meet you in real life. And always meet your mutuals. It's a fun time. So he presents to me a t-shirt because, as my audience knows, I do a lot of fishing videos. I like to go fish in the family pond. I like going fishing out on trips where I'm boating, going on various lakes and rivers and things like that. It's a fun time. I have a nice bound copy of The Complete Angler by Isaac Walton. Anyways, this guy comes up to me, and it's a t-shirt of a largemouth bass being caught on a lure. And the caption on the t-shirt says, "Of course I come fast. I have fish to catch." Good night, everybody.